Welcome to Celtic Medicine Stories, a podcast where we explore stories from the old Celtic lands, with the understanding that they carry medicine for us. I'm your host, Kat Horton, and I offer these stories in the spirit of the oral storytelling tradition of the British Isles. That is, they are free and they're open to everyone, always. Although these stories often have come from another time and have evolved through time with the oral storytelling tradition, they are here still for a reason. If you're curious about going deeper with this story, with the images, symbols, characters, landscapes, sounds, whatever it is that's speaking to you from this particular story, then there are some free resources below which will help guide you in that process. This story grabbed my attention, and I'm still not sure why. Its deeper mysteries have yet to be revealed to me. I keep telling it as a way to honor the medicine it carries and let it sink further into me. I'm very curious to know what you might make of it. The Lad of the Skins is from the Fianna cycle of Irish mythology. These tales of the Fianna, a roving band of warrior poets, were told all across Ireland and the Scottish Highlands and Islands, and they still are. They are set in the 3rd century of the Common Era and often feature Finn, whom we met in episode 9, the Salmon of Wisdom. But in this tale, Finn takes a back seat to this mysterious stranger who steps into their circle one evening. I trust that stories that insist I tell them have something to say to me and to whomever chooses to listen. So I offer this one to you. This one that's been quite vocal about being told, knowing that whatever it opens up for you will be a gift on your path. So as you listen to this story, as with all these Celtic medicine stories, let yourself float. You don't need to pay attention in the way maybe you were asked to do in school. You don't need to try and follow the plot line or the dialogue or anything in particular. In fact, the medicine lies in what you find yourself attending to. So when you let yourself go into that receptive, floaty state and you find your mind wanting to savor an image or a sound or a word, and you find yourself more engaged with that than whatever it is that I'm saying, then notice that. You don't need to analyze it or try and figure it out in that moment, but just notice it, that called your attention, because that's where the medicine lies. Wherever this story interacts with your story is what you're looking for. And I believe this is part of why these stories have been around for so long, is because they each interact with us in some special way. And so as you listen, just let yourself absorb it and notice which parts stick out to you. And allow yourself to drift up from this land, from these mountains, whether you're on the East Coast, the West Coast, you're somewhere in the middle. Just let yourself drift up and drift across the Atlantic Ocean, heading east. And as you go further, you might find it's cloudy over there. It often is. You might find a bank of cloud that you have to dive down through. But somewhere down below that bank of cloud is the Emerald Isle. It's green, shining, beautiful trees in full bloom in the summer. And it's somewhere on the edge where that forest meets the ocean. We're going to dive down deeper and deeper into this forest. Imagine yourselves coming down through the canopy and landing in this thick forest. It's thick with oak and ash and thorn and elm and holly. And it's thick with a wandering band of poet warriors called the Fianna. Now, these men live the whole summer months. They live out in the forest, and their job is to protect the whole of Ireland. And they can be found, sometimes if you're lucky, you'll find them in different parts of the country. They go all around. And they are apparently the best warriors in the whole country. And apparently some of the best poets also. They've been said that some of them can dance on spears while reciting poetry. Now their leader is called Finn McCool. And he's a very magical fellow, but that's for a whole nother story. But often they are found sitting around a fire in the evening when their day's jobs are done. So imagine that you're walking through this thick forest, thick with ferns and mosses, maybe some mushrooms, and you hear off in the distance a gaggle of noises and a crackle of a fire. And as you come closer, you see the orange glow of the firelight cast into the forest where their camp is, and a bunch of men sitting around whittling sticks and chewing on bits of meat. You even see Finn over there on the other side of the fire. He's got these two huge wolfhounds that are with him always. And one evening, they're sitting there by the fire, telling stories, chewing on bits of meat, just doing what they do. And without a sound, without even the crack of a stick, a total stranger steps into the circle of firelight. You can see a lot of the men drawing back. They're surprised by this very young-looking man that's just stepped in. He's got wild brown hair and these deep, dark, chocolatey eyes. And this beard that he's tended, he's plaited it into this long braid. It seems to have a black bear skin around him and what looks like deer further below, and some of the skins that don't have any fur that look maybe like human skins. People sort of recoil, not sure about him. Finn watches. Now Finn's two dogs get up. They walk over slowly to the stranger. He puts his hand out. They sniff his hand and then they rub up against him and he scratches their ears. Very strange greeting for these dogs who are usually very protective. And the lad says, "I'm here to see Finn McCool." And Finn says, "Aye, you found him." The lad says, "Oh, I know. I just wanted to let you know that I'm here and I'd like to be in your service for some time." Now, usually, in order to get into the Fianna, you have to do a whole bunch of tasks. They give you all sorts of feats and things to do. So it was very surprising that Finn said, "Very well then, you're welcome. Come sit down with us." And the lad said, "Well, I have things to do this evening, but I'll be back at the crack of dawn tomorrow." And off he went, without a sound. He just walked back into the forest. Now, true to his word, the next morning, he showed up just as the sun was starting to filter through the trees from the east and the birds were just starting to... He showed up, said, "Right, what are we doing today?" Now, not to miss a chance to test him, of course, Finn said, "Well, we're going hunting. And we're going to see, me and my men and you, and we'll see who gets the most." And the lad says, "Well, very well, then. That sounds great. How about you take the forests and the lush meadows, and I'll take the bogs and the really high barren places." Some raised eyebrows at this suggestion. Finn says, "Well, very well, then." And some of the men chuckled. "Well, this isn't going to go well, is it?" But off they go. And the lad goes off to the bogs. Now, as the day wears on, they do what men do when they're out hunting. And as the evening starts to pull in, they come back, the men and Finn come back to the fire, to that camp, and they find him sitting there on this big pile of animals that he has captured and killed. There's multitudes of deer, at least 2 bears, a whole clutch of salmon, rabbits, pheasants, partridges, anything you could think of. And they came back, Finn and his men came back with a handful of pigeons. So there was more raised eyebrows. Now, some of the men went and just slapped him on the back. "Ah, well done, lad. Look what you did. This is great. We're going to feast tonight." Others were not so excited. And they skulked around the edge of the circle, seething with anger and jealousy and resentment. Nonetheless, they all feasted that night. Now, as the feast was wearing down and the fire was getting low, one particular warrior went up to Finn, sat next to him, and said, Well, what do you think of this lad of the skins then? And Finn said, well, doesn't seem to matter what I think of him, does it? What do you think of him? Well, I don't like him one bit. I see that. Well, what are you proposing we do? And so this warrior, Conan, his name, says, well, I think we need to test him harder than this. Well, what do you propose? Why don't we send him to go and get the cauldron of plenty? It's not a bad idea, says Finn. The cauldron of plenty, I mean, we could use that, then we wouldn't have to hunt. We wouldn't have to do this. Because the cauldron of plenty is this beautiful silver cauldron that whenever you dip your bowl in it, it's full. It's full of stew or meat or meat or whatever it is you're in need of. It's full of it, always, constantly, never runs out. It's an amazing, magical thing. So Finn said, well, that would be great if we had the cauldron of plenty. Okay. And so the next morning he called the lad of the skins over and he told him the plan. Need to go and get the cauldron of plenty from the king of the floods. He's who's got it right now. Lad of the skins didn't even bat an eyelid. Okay, all right, I'll be back later. And he started running, and off he went into the forest. And they said he ran through the forest and he ran across the plains until he got to the hills. And then he leaped from hilltop to hilltop to hilltop until he got to the shore. And then he went down onto the beach and he looked around for two sticks that were the same size. And he found them. He found these two sticks that were the same size and he held them up. And he said in words that nobody else can understand, some incantation. And as he breathed that out into the air, these two sticks turned into a whole pile of sticks. And as he kept speaking, they turned into a boat with a sail that he jumped in. And he starts rowing west across the sea. And he's going to the hall of the King of the Floods. Now, the King of the Floods, he already knows, lives in this really high peak that's sticking out of the ocean. And so as he rows towards west, he's following the setting sun. He's able to look down under the sea and see some of the villages and the towns and the mountains and things that were flooded that are down there. And he keeps going and he keeps going and he keeps going. And eventually he sees it out there, this huge hall, wooden hall on top of this big rock that sticks up out of the ocean. He knows this is the place. And as he gets closer and closer and closer, he sees this one single set of stairs that goes on a windy twist all the way from the hall, all the way down to the harbor at the bottom where there are hundreds of ships. He must be having some kind of gathering. There's all these ships at the bottom. So he docks his ship and he does it again. He leaps from deck to deck to deck to deck to deck of all these different boats and he hops up onto the harbor and runs up the stairways, up the peak of this mountain to the hall. Big carved wooden doors, beautiful, with all these images from the sea. There's whales and dolphins and octopi and seaweed and mermaids. And you can't look at the doors. They're wide open. And inside, an enormous feasting hall. On two walls, big fireplaces burning brightly with fire, candelabras strung along the ceiling in between, and an enormous wooden table with benches laid with more food than he's ever seen. Guests from all over, it seems, are there. And right at the end of the table, in a big carved throne with giant whale heads carved into the throne, sits the King of the Floods. He seems to be wearing a whale skin or he's huge. He's sitting there, feasting and laughing and slapping his hand on the table as he has a great old time. And the lad of the skins just stands at the door and he watches this for some time. And then, very loudly, he claps his hands. Everybody stops. They all turn to him. What kind of a feast is this? I've been standing here for who knows how long and nobody's even offered me a food or any drink or anything. Now, in those days, a man's worth was measured by your hospitality. And so right away, the king said, send this lad the cauldron of plenty. And so the cauldron was passed from hand to hand to hand to hand to hand to hand until it arrived in his hands. And he was given a bowl, a wooden bowl. He dipped it in. Oh, it tasted the most beautiful, delicious soup he'd ever tasted. And then he simply put his hands on the two handles of the silver cauldron, turned around on his heel, and ran. Off he went down the steps, running with the cauldron, all the way back down to the harbor, hopped across all the ship decks again, bloop, 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 right to his, got in his boat, put the cauldron down, and started rowing. And he was laughing. It said they could hear him from the hall. Just delighted with himself that that had been so easy. And he rowed for a little while. They realized that they hadn't been able to catch up with him. He'd gone so fast. And then he started to feel a little bit, disappointed. A little bit like, anticlimax. Like, oh, that wasn't much of a feat. I didn't really do anything. I mean, I just grabbed the thing and ran away. It's not really much of a story, is it? So he turned his boat around and he rowed back to the King of the Floods. And he got there and he docked his boat and they were waiting for him. They were still all standing on the harbor going, what just happened? And so they were ready for him. And he got out his two hunting knives and he jumped up there. And the biggest fight you've ever thought of ensued. Everyone's trying to get him. He's defending himself left and right, stabbing people. It's not good. Eventually, either they're all dead or they run up the hill and they get away from him. And he's like, oh, that's a better story. So he jumps back in his boat and he rows back east. And he delivers the cauldron to Finn, who's very chuffed, very excited to have this cauldron. This is great. This means they don't have to spend so much time hunting. They can get whatever they want. They can spend more time defending the island. Now, the Lad of the Skins remains in Finn's service for some time. Some say a few months, some say a couple of years, some time. And then at some point, they come to a mutual agreement that his time is over. And he moves on. Now, Finn still has the cauldron. He's not letting go of that. That's still making their lives much, much easier. And one day, it was late in the autumn, Finn was sitting, he'd gone to a spring, as was his custom. He'd go every day, and he'd say some prayers to the spring. He'd talk to the spirits of the water, and he'd listen and hear what he needed to hear. And on this particular day, what he heard was, the King of the Floods wants his cauldron back. And he's raising an army. And if you don't take it back, he's going to come and his army will overcome you. You will not be able to survive this onslaught. Now that surprised him. He wasn't expecting that. Now Finn, way back, he had eaten the salmon of wisdom. It's a whole nother story. And this has given him access to all the knowledge in all the world. But he only accessed it when he put his thumb in his mouth. So he thought, this is a good time to do that. He put his thumb in his mouth. Yep, that's true. He knew it in his bones. He knew that the King of the Floods was coming for the cauldron, and he needed to get it back to him. And the next thought that came to him was, oh, well, I have to go with the Lad of the Skins. I can't do this on my own. And so he set out. He told his men where he was going. We didn't know where he was going. He was going to find the Lad of the Skins, but didn't know where he was. So he set out looking for him. And he wandered for some time, days, until he came across the lad sitting fishing in a bend of the River Shannon under a hazel tree. And they greeted each other. They were happy to see each other. They parted on good terms. And Finn told him the problem. This is what's going on, and I need to get this cauldron back to the King of the Floods, and I need your help. And the lad looked at the water and kind of jiggled his fishing rod a little bit and said, well, I'm no longer in your service. You're going to have to ask my wife. Oh, I didn't even know you were married. Okay. That doesn't seem too hard. I can go and ask your wife. And the lad said, well, she's not going to like it. She's not going to like it one bit. But I tell you what, now my wife is the daughter of Manannán MacLear. Now Manannán MacLear is the king of the sea. This is his daughter. And the lad goes on to tell Finn, and it is the way of things that in the evening, when she's combing her hair with a golden comb that her father gave her, she sings her songs, that if you were to ask her during that time, she cannot refuse you. Well, this is good information, said Finn. And the sun was starting to set, so the lad was like, well, it's getting close. You should go. The tent it's not too far away over there. And Finn said, well, you're going to come with me? He said, oh, no, no, this one's for you. And so Finn went off back into the woods, and it didn't take him long to find the tent because he could hear the songs, these beautiful songs that just made him think of dolphins and mermaids and little fishies swimming in the sea that were floating out of this skin-covered tent. And he had to kind of shake himself and stop being so entranced and remember why he was there. And he went and he crouched down outside the tent and he said, my lady, this is Finn McCool. She stopped singing. And I've come to ask a request of you. Silence. I would like your husband, the lad of the skins, to come with me and return the cauldron of plenty to the king of the floods. After a very, very long pause, she said, I hear you, Finn McCool. And as you know, I cannot refuse, but I have one condition. Oh, anything, my dear lady, anything. You bring him back to me. Whether he's dead or alive, you bring him back to me. Do you promise me, Finn McCool? Promise me? Of course I'll bring him back. And I'll be waiting on the shore for you. And as you sail back, I want you to raise a green-gray flag on the mast if he's alive. And if he's dead, raise a red one. Will you do that for me, Finn McCool? You have my word, my lady. So it was. So he went back and he told the lad, and they prepared themselves. And the next morning, they're standing on that same beach. And he does it again. He's looking around now for two sticks that are the same size. He finds them, he holds them up, and he says these words in some language older than anyone can remember. And the sticks turn into a whole pile of sticks, and then they turn into a boat, and it's already got a sail. And he says, wait. And he goes out to the rushes that are growing on the side, and he weaves quickly a gray-green banner out of grass. And from his belt, he pulls a red fox skin. And he says, here are the two flags, stow them carefully. And he pushes the boat off, and off they go. And they're rowing, and they're rowing, they're both rowing this time across the sea, and Finn's amazed at all the towns and villages and things he can see under the sea that have been flooded. And before they know it, there's that huge mountain coming out of the ocean with that big wooden hall on top of it, and they can see smoke coming out of the chimney. This time there's hardly any ships there. It doesn't look like there's much going on. And so they dock easily. And they get the cauldron out the boat. And off they go up the spiral staircase, around the mountain, and up to the top. This time he knocks on the door. It's not open. They knock on the door and they call out, this is Finn McCool. We've brought back the cauldron of plenty. And the doors swing open. And there's the king of the floods sitting in the same chair with the carved whale heads. They walk up to him and they give him the cauldron. And he looks at them kind of skeptically and is like, it's about time. It's about time you return this to me. Now, why don't you sit down and eat before you go? And they had a grand old meal, and they told stories, and they told riddles and jokes, and they drank some mead. They slapped each other on the back, and all was well. They left the cauldron on the table, and they left. Went down the stairs, jumped in the boat. Now, as they were sailing home, rowing, and they had to do a lot more rowing this time, or rowing back east, quite pleased with themselves because it had gone quite well. And they didn't have the cauldron anymore, and that wasn't great, but they'd lived plenty of time without it. They didn't really need it, and that had gone better than expected. So they were feeling quite pleased with themselves. At some point in the journey, they were not too far away from home. They saw another ship coming on the horizon. And Finn looked at the lad and realized that was the first time ever he'd seen the lad look afraid. He'd gone deathly white, staring at this ship. He didn't say anything. As the ship got closer, he could feel the lad getting tighter and tighter. And as the ship pulled up, he said to Finn, "This man hates me. He was spurned by my wife. She didn't reciprocate his love, and now he hates me. He vowed he'd find me." And before he could finish the rest of the sentence, the lad had leaped off their boat and onto the deck of this other man's boat, and they were fighting already. They were biting at each other and hitting each other and stabbing each other, and they fought and they fought and they fought, and Finn knew this was not his fight to get involved in, and so he watched from his boat. And they fought and fought and fought throughout the day. They kept fighting, and as he watched them, he could see these two men aging. Their hair was becoming white, their beards becoming gray, their skin becoming translucent. He could see the blue veins in their fingers as they clawed at each other, until eventually they were both decrepit old men, and they just fell on the deck of the boat. Before Finn had a chance to have an idea of what was going on, he saw them shift into two puppies, and they were nipping at each other. Trying to bite each other's tails and trying to scratch each other and trying to bite each other's ears. And they fought and they fought and they fought all day long. And these dogs grew into mature dogs and then into old dogs, graying around the ears and around the muzzle. And they still kept trying to bite each other and claw each other, until eventually both dogs just fell flat on the deck. And then before Finn could even fathom what was going on, he saw them shift again, this time into two foals, little baby horses. And they were at it again, clashing of hooves and rearing up and biting, these two fighting each other. And these foals grew into mature horses as they continued to fight, and into old horses as they continued to fight. And again they fell to the deck of the ship. And one more time they shifted, this time into eagles. And now there was talons trying to rip feathered flesh, beaks pecking. Eves of the two of them as they fought and fought and fought. And eventually the other man in his eagle form fell flat on the deck. And then the lad fell flat on the deck. And Finn waited and waited. Neither of them moved. All he could hear now was the flapping of the sails in the wind, the lapping of the water on the boats. So he climbed over onto the other man's ship, and he touched the body of the lad in his eagle form. Nothing. Nothing. He was dead. We gathered him up. And now he's starting to sob. He can't believe what's just happened. And he's sobbing and sobbing, and he's holding this eagle dead in his arms. He doesn't know what to do. He's completely broken-hearted. He loved this man, this friend. And he remembers that the lad's wife is waiting for him on the shore. And so he digs around and he pulls out that red fox skin banner and he hoists it up on the mast. And between his tears, He rose, and he rose much more slowly this time, but he rose east till he comes in sight of the shore and sees her. He can see her standing there. And she sees him coming, and she sees the red banner. And he sees her drop to her knees in the beach as she starts to wail. And as he pulls up, he gathers the body of the eagle and he wraps it in the fox skin and he hands it to her. She can't even look at it. Leave me! Leave me! She screams at him and he walks into the woods. Now she's holding the eagle and she's rocking with him and she's crying and she's crying and she doesn't know what to do either. And she's there all night, the stars and the moon witnessing her grief as she sobs into this fox skin eagle body, thinking of all the times they had together, thinking of when they met, thinking of all the dreams they had together that will not come true. And in the morning, it comes upon her the idea to go find two sticks the same length as each other. So she goes and she roots around on the beach and she finds these two sticks and she holds them up. And without her knowing it, the words come from her mouth into the ocean air, these words in this language that everyone has forgotten. And these sticks turn into a pile of sticks which then shape themselves into a boat. Without knowing what she's doing or where she's going, she gathers up his eagle body wrapped in the red fox skin and she puts it in the boat. She pushes it off and she starts to row. And she rows and she rows and she cries and she sings all of his favorite songs, every one she can manage to get out between the sobs. She sings into the air. And she doesn't know where she's going. She has no idea. She keeps passing all these different islands and looking for something. She doesn't even know what she's looking for, but she knows she can't stay on that beach and sob any longer. And so she's rowing and she's singing and she's crying and his body's wrapped in the bottom of the boat. At one point, late in the afternoon, as she's looking up at the clouds, hoping for some clue, something, she sees flying overhead two eagles, and they're carrying between them a third eagle that's not moving. And she watches them fly, and they land on an island over there. She watches them. She follows. She starts to row towards that island. And it's a long way, so she's still rowing when she looks up again, and now she sees three eagles flying away from that island. Well, that's curious. What's that about? It's the only sign she's seen all day, so she follows it. And she travels to that island. And she sees on it's a very small island. It's really just a big hill. And on top of that hill is the biggest tree she's ever seen. Its branches spreading out in all directions, weighted down with big, beautiful leaves. And at the bottom of that tree, it's full of moss. It's very old. And even though it's summer and the leaves are full on the tree, there's still a bed of leaves down below it. And so she gathers up his eagle body in the red fox skin and she puts it at the bottom of the tree and she covers it with leaves. And she's so exhausted at this point, that's all she can do. And she goes a little further down the hill and she sits down. And the only song that she's got left sounds like this. as she sings through the night. Some say she sang for 3 days and 3 nights. Until one morning, she hears a rustling behind her. She feels a hand on her shoulder and she looks up, and there he is. There he is in his full human form with his wild hair and his chocolate eyes and his braided beard, wearing a bear skin, carrying the fox skin. And he takes her hand, her face in his hands, and he kisses her. Good morning, my love. Thank you for waiting. She's beside herself with joy. She doesn't know what to do. She just hugs him and kisses him and kisses him and hugs him. And they both offer thanks to the tree and the leaves and the island. And they don't know what else to do but get in the boat and go home. And so they do. And he rows. She's exhausted. He rows them home. Now, meanwhile, Finn has gone on with his life. What's he going to do? His friend is dead. He's gone on. He's lost lots of warriors in his time. He knows how to do that. And they're sitting at their fire one evening when, without a sound, without even a crack of a stick, a couple step into the firelight out of the dark. He sees him. And the lad says, "I'm looking for Finn McCool." And Finn says, I'm here. How are you here? And the lad says, "Well, I've come for my wages. You never paid me for that last job." And they all burst out laughing. And Finn runs to him and hugs him. And they sit down and they feast, and he pays them his wages, and they spend the evening together. And then that next morning, before the birds are even singing, the lad and his wife gently slip away from the camp. And Finn never sees him again. And so it was, or so they say it was. Thank you for listening to this episode of Celtic Medicine Stories. If you want to go deeper, check out my Working with Archetypes free email course. There's a link somewhere in these notes. You'll find it. And feel free to visit on my website, kathoughton.com, KATHOUGHTON.com. I'd love to hear from you. Go well.